येलो में आप देख पा रहे हैं, इससे आपको इस क्वेश्चन को याद करने में आसानी होगी। और ये हमारा फर्स्ट क्रिटिकल कोटेशन है। Wordsworth is a poet of the mountain and the sky and the stream and the woods, and the feeling came from these. He writes the poetry which the common man can read. William Wordsworth 1717-1850 ये डेट ऑफ बर्थ एंड डेथ है, was an English romantic poet and poet laureate. As a young man, Wordsworth developed a love for nature. He was part of the Lake Poets. He is considered as a high priest of nature. He was also a mentor and friend to Robert Southey, Charles Lamb, and P.B. Shelley. He, with Samuel Taylor Coleridge, wrote Lyrical Ballad. During the Industrial Revolution, he hosted the Romantic movement in literature. P.B. Shelley इनके बारे में कहते हैं, The last great poet I shall ever see. ये हमारा introduction of essay है. Preface to Lyrical Ballad 1798-1802 is an essay that defends the poem in Lyrical Ballads. It is considered as a manifesto of the Romantic movement. It challenges the conventions of new classical poetry. The preface explores the subject of poetry, qualities of a poet, and emotion recollected in tranquility. It is based on the themes of humanity, common language of people, and role of poet as a teacher. It promotes new style of poetry that is based on natural language, emotion, and imagination. और ये हमारा एक और critical quotation है. The preface to Lyrical Ballad marks the beginning of a new era in the English poetry, and it contains the first clear statement to the principle of romanticism. हमारा फर्स्ट पैराग्राफ सब्जेक्ट ऑफ पोइट्री को डिफाइन करता है। आइए हम इसे स्टडी करें। In the section of subject of poetry, a poem should deals with incident and situations from common life. Imagination should present ordinary thing in an unusual way. Low and rustic life should be chosen because in that condition the essential passion of the heart find a better soul in which they can attain maturity. In common language, it should express the emotion and experiences of the poet and the common people. He thus defines poetry as: poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling. It takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. हमारा जो सेकंड पैराग्राफ है ये कंसेप्ट ऑफ पोइट्री को डिफ़ाइन करता है और कि पोएम का निर्माण कैसे हो ये भी डिफ़ाइन करता है हमारा सेकंड पैराग्राफ। In the concept of poetry, Wordsworth believed that intuition, not reason, should guide the poet. He has also mentioned the main four causes of poetic composition, that is, observation, recollection, contemplation, and composition. Powerful feelings are the raw material to create poem. In tranquility, he recalls his imagination. His poem Tintin Abbey, The Solitary Reaper, and Daffodil came out of this process. हमारा नेक्स्ट पैराग्राफ वैल्यू ऑफ पोइट्री को डिफाइन करता है। In the section of value of poetry, poetry connects us to the shared experiences. It states that poetry is the image of nature and man. It transcends human created, religious, political, and social barriers. Poetry is a source of moral and philosophical value. It is above all sciences. यहाँ पे quotation भी है, poetry is the breath and the finer spirit of all knowledge. It is the impassioned expression which is continence of all science. इसके बाद जो विलियम वर्ड्सवर्थ है ये लैंग्वेज ऑफ पोइट्री को भी डिफ़ाइन करते हैं अपने प्रीफेस टू लिरिकल बैलेड में, और वो कहते हैं कि इन द सेक्शन द लैंग्वेज ऑफ पोइट्री ही स्टेट्स not to use dishonorable and shocking language. The language really used by men is adopted. Simple language is more permanent than a philosophical one. Wordsworth rejects poets of the past such as Dryden and Alexander Pope for their artificial and capricious language. He aims to express the permanent meaning of natural truth. Such language arising out of repeated experience and regular feeling is a more permanent and a far more philosophical language. इसके साथ हमारा नेक्स्ट पैराग्राफ पोइटिक डिक्शन के ऊपर है। In poetic diction, Wordsworth's choice of words, phrases, sentence structure, and figurative language is simple. Wordsworth argues that diction of poetry and prose is same, and he criticizes the neoclassicist. Passion should drive diction, not ornament, dignity, or meter. It is poet's medium, while prose has setting, plot to convey meaning. A poet has merely words for expression. He wants poetry to center around poetic truth and beauty. He criticizes poetic diction of Milton. Poetry shed no tears such as angels weep, but natural and human tears. The same blood circulates through the veins of them both. हमारा जो नेक्स्ट पैराग्राफ है ये है फंक्शन ऑफ पोइट्री के बारे में। ट्रेडिशनली द फंक्शन ऑफ पोइट्री वाज टू इंस्ट्रक्ट एंड डिलाइट, बट फॉर द वर्ड्सवर्थ द फंक्शन ऑफ पोइट्री इज़ टू गिव प्लेजर। Poetic pleasure results from increased knowledge and understanding. Science only appeal to intellect, where poetry complements science by adding feeling to its truth. It cultivates us, enlightens, and educates us. Poetry also gives deep moral lesson of life. Poetry has been compared to a morning star which radiates through the darkness. Poetry can refine and regenerate mankind. It is the instrument for the propagation of moral thought. It is a fruit and the flower of human knowledge. सो आप अब पैराग्राफ में देख सकते हैं कि वर्ड्सवर्थ प्लेजर प्रिंसिपल पे मेनली फोकस करते हैं। अब हमने जान लिया कि फंक्शन ऑफ पोइट्री क्या होती है। अब हम नेक्स्ट स्टडी करने वाले हैं कि एक पोइट के क्या गुण होते हैं, कि हम कैसे पहचानें कि ये कवि है। तो वर्ड्सवर्थ ये भी बताते हैं। फर्स्ट कहते हैं कि जो पोएट है उसमें मोर लिवली सेंसिबिलिटी एंड मोर एंथुजियाज्म एंड टेंडरनेस हो। सेकंड, ग्रेट नॉलेज ऑफ ह्यूमन नेचर। थर्ड, मोर कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव सोल। फोर्थ, प्लीज्ड विद हिज ओन पैशन। फिफ्थ, great power of expression. In the section of qualities of a poet, he states a poet is a man speaking to men. He has more lively sensibility, more enthusiasm and tenderness. A good poet has a more comprehensive soul than other people, and he can portray the feelings of others. He is pleased with his own passion and volition and rejoices more than other men in the spirit of life that is in him. He says, the man of science seeks truth in his solitude. The poet sings a song in which all human beings can join with him. A good poet acquires a great readiness and power to express what he thinks and feels, and especially those thoughts and feelings which arises in him without immediate external excitement. A good poet can uplift and enlighten other human beings. According to the Wordsworth, every great poet is a teacher, and he once said, every great poet is a teacher, and I wish either to be considered as a teacher or as nothing. वर्ड्सवर्थ की ये जो कोटेशन है जिसमें कहते हैं वो कि हर एक जो ग्रेट पोइट है या फिर ग्रेट पर्सन है वो एक टीचर होता है। अब देख सकते हैं कि डॉक्टर एस राधाकृष्णन एंड डॉक्टर APJ अब्दुल कलाम, ये जो महान लोग हुए हैं पास्ट में, दे ऑल वांट टू बी कंसिडर्ड एज ए टीचर, एंड दिस इज़ द ब्यूटी ऑफ इट दैट एवरी ग्रेट पर्सन विशेज हिमसेल्फ टू सी देमसेल्फ एज टीचर। ये हमारा नेक्स्ट पैराग्राफ है। द मेन मोटो ऑफ राइटिंग प्रीफेस टू लिरिकल बैलेड इज़ टू एम्फसाइज रिटर्न टू नेचर। दे टर्न अवे फ्रॉम द आर्टिफिशियल अर्बन लाइफ एंड फाउंड रिफ्यूज इन द कंट्री लाइफ एंड नेचर। दे वर्शिप नेचर। लव ऑफ नेचर फॉर दैम meant love of mankind, humanism, and a more world view that encompass the idea of freedom and equality. Therefore, Wordsworth says, humble and rustic life was generally chosen because the passion of the heart can attain their maturity. ये ऐसे है, इस ऐसे में मैंने स्पेशली क्रिटिसिज्म को भी ऐड किया है ताकि आपको ये काफ़ी अच्छा लगे। However, some criticism are also raised on it. The preface is too long and verbose and sometimes contradicts itself and repeats the same points. There is an overemphasis of emotion over intellect. The preface has subjective approach. Wordsworth relies too much on his experiences and taste. T.S. Eliot criticized it on the statement of language of prose and poetry. He further remarks, Wordsworth's importance is historically is very great, but his theory is a theory of poetic diction, not of poetry. और ये हमारा लास्ट कंक्लूजन है. And in a nutshell of essence, Preface to Lyrical Ballad is a revolutionary manifesto that challenges the classical norms of new classical poetry. It emphasizes on natural language, emotion, and imagination. According to Wordsworth, there is no distinction between language of prose and poetry. He emphasizes on natural language use. He relies on the simple truth of nature and claims to find them in countryside rather than in city. Due to romanticism in literature, poets like Coleridge, Shelley, Byron, Keats and Blake appeared. और ये हमारा एक और quotation है. The preface to Lyrical Ballad was not just a preface, it was a manifesto for a revolution in poetry which advocates for poets freedom of speech and choice of subject. एंड इसके साथ मैं आशा करता हूँ कि आपको ये वीडियो समझ आई होगी. एंड थैंक यू वेरी मच.